Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. I'm really excited for today's topic. We're going to be taking a look at Dostoyevsky's The Brothers Karamazov.
Mm.
This is a book I've wanted to talk about for quite some time,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of our listeners have requested it as well.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating book. I mean, just incredibly complex. You've got so much going on in there. You've got, philosophy and religion and family drama and,
Yeah, and
crime.
psychology and all these big ideas swirling around. So what we're going to try to do today is to give you sort of an express tour, you know,
Mm.
highlight some of the most interesting parts without getting bogged down in, all the details.
Right, because it can be a really dense book.
Yeah.
It can be hard to know where to even begin with it.
Right. And so what we did is we pulled some really interesting excerpts from a variety of sources. We're going to kind of jump around a bit. We're going to look at Dostoevsky's own life
Mm.
because it's really fascinating how much of his own experience he poured into this book. We're going to talk about this character called the Grand Inquisitor,
Mm.
who is like this amazing philosophical creation.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Karamazov family themselves.
Oh, yeah.
The father and the sons and all the drama and conflict between them. And then also like just the spiritual themes that run throughout the book.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
The search for meaning.
Yeah. So are you ready to dive in?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay. So one of the things that really jumped out at me right away is this theme of parricide, this idea of a son killing his father. It pops up in Dostoevsky's work
Oh, yeah.
over and over again.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's actually something that was very much present in his own life as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost uncanny
Yeah.
how much of his own experience kind of bleeds into the story.
So, I mean, like when he was a young kid, I mean, think about this. He was totally fascinated by this play by Schiller called The Robbers,
Right.
which is about, rebellion, sons turning against their fathers, all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And then later on, when he's at the engineering academy in St. Petersburg,
Yeah.
guess what? He's studying in the very building where Emperor Paul was murdered by his own son.
That's creepy.
It's a little freaky, right? So you have to wonder if like just the atmosphere of that place maybe had some influence on him.
Right. Like it kind of seeps into your subconscious.
Yeah. But then the really significant event in his life, this is the one that really seems to have shaped him, is the death of his own father in 1839.
Yeah.
So his father died under mysterious circumstances. Rumors started flying that he'd been murdered by his own serfs. Now, historians still debate exactly what happened.
Right.
But the point is, Dostoevsky himself believed it.
Mm.
He was convinced that his father had been murdered.
Yeah.
And there's even some speculation that he felt guilty about it because
Yeah.
it wasn't there,
Yeah.
And he had actually just written this letter to his father asking for money.
Wow.
So it's like, did he somehow contribute to this?
Right.
You can imagine the kind of psychological turmoil
Yeah.
that would create.
And Freud actually picked up on this and talked about how this event might have been connected to the Oedipus complex in Dostoevsky's life and work.
The idea of, a son wanting to overthrow his father.
Yeah.
And then on top of all of this, you have his involvement with these utopian socialists,
Yes.
which led to him being arrested
Yeah.
and sent to Siberia.
Yeah.
And this was seen as like, a metaphorical threat to the Tsar
Right.
because he was challenging the established order.
Yeah.
So you have all this stuff, like these early fascinations, these traumas, and then it's like it all kind of comes together in The Brothers Karamazov.
It's like he's working through all of these issues in the book.
Right. And even later on in his life, he was reading The Robbers to his own children.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this theme just kept coming back to him.
Yeah.
Now, there's this one story in particular that really stood out to me from his time in Siberia, which is the story of a man named Alinsky.
Oh, yeah.
You've heard of him?
Oh, yeah.
So this guy Alinsky had been wrongly accused of murdering his father, and he had spent 10 years in prison, like a decade in prison,
Wow.
maintaining his innocence the whole time, even though like all the evidence seemed to point to him.
Yeah.
And then finally the actual murderers confessed,
Oh, wow.
and he was exonerated.
Yeah.
But Dostoevsky met this guy,
Yeah.
and he became totally convinced
Yeah.
of his innocence. And this idea of like a man being wrongly accused of parricide, it clearly had a huge impact on him. And you can see it reflected in the story of Dmitri Karamazov.
Oh, absolutely. It's
That's
like he
it.
took that real life story and kind of wove it into the novel.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just fascinating how these real life events kind of shape fiction, right?
Yeah, it gives it this real weight, this sense of authenticity.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about Dostoevsky's life. Let's talk about this character, the Grand Inquisitor.
Yeah.
This is one of the most famous parts of the Brothers Karamazov.
Right, absolutely.
It's this kind of like standalone story within the novel,
Yeah.
and it's just so thought-provoking.
Yeah.
So the basic setup is this. We have this 90-year-old Roman Catholic cardinal, this guy, the Grand Inquisitor,
Yeah.
and he's in 16th century Seville. And his job is to oversee the burning of heretics.
Right.
Like, this is not a nice guy.
Not a friendly guy.
No. And then suddenly Jesus Christ himself appears in his prison cell.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, what moment,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally unexpected.
But like, what's going on here?
And what's really interesting is that the Grand Inquisitor is presented as this kind of like paradoxical figure.
Yeah.
He's an atheist.
Right.
He doesn't actually believe in God.
Yeah.
But he's also portrayed as someone who deeply loves humanity.
Yeah.
In his own twisted way.
Yeah. It's a very kind of like controlling love.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, like, I know what's best for you.
Yeah.
And so his whole goal is to create a society where everyone is happy. But the way he wants to do that is through like total control.
Yeah.
Like a rigidly organized society where everything is taken care of for you. You don't have to make any difficult choices.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
You just kind of like exist.
Yeah. It's like this kind of benevolent dictatorship almost.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And his central argument is that freedom is actually a burden.
Yeah.
Like, it's too much for most people to handle.
It's too much responsibility.
Yeah. And he says that what people really need are three things: mystery, miracle, and authority.
Mm.
So what do you think he means by that?
Well, I think mystery refers to like the unknowable aspects of God, you know, the stuff that's beyond our comprehension. And miracle is about like the supernatural, the stuff that defies logic and reason.
Yeah.
And then authority is about having like a clear structure,
Yeah.
you know, like someone to tell you what to do and what to believe.
Yeah. And he basically says that Jesus was wrong to reject these things.
Yeah.
Like when Jesus was tempted in the desert,
Right. Right.
Satan offered him all these things, like turn stones into bread, throw yourself off the temple, and God will save you.
Yeah.
Rule all the kingdoms of the world. But Jesus rejected all those temptations.
Right.
And the Grand Inquisitor says that that was a mistake,
Yeah.
that he should have given people what they wanted.
Yeah. He should have taken the easy way out.
Yeah. And he argues that the Catholic Church has actually done a better job than Jesus.
Yeah.
Because they've embraced these principles.
They've given people what they need.
Right. And they've created this system where everyone can just kind of like fall in line
Yeah.
and be happy.
Yeah.
Now, of course, this is a very controversial idea.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, is he right?
Right.
Is freedom actually a burden?
Is ignorance bliss?
Yeah. Is it better to just give people what they want, even if it means taking away their choices?
Yeah.
It's a really tough question.
It is.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Karamazov family themselves.
Okay.
Starting with the father, Fyodor Pavlovich.
Hmm.
This guy is like a force of nature.
Yeah, he's a real piece of work.
Yeah. I mean, he's wild, he's often drunk, he's completely immoral,
Yeah.
but he's also kind of charming in this weird way.
Yeah, he's got that kind of like roguish charisma.
Yeah. And he's surprisingly successful in business,
Yeah.
even though like his methods are super shady.
Yeah, he's always scheming.
Yeah.
Always trying to make a buck.
Yeah. So he has this second wife, Sofia Ivanovna,
Right.
who is much younger than him. She's an orphan.
Yeah.
And she comes from a different province.
Yeah.
And their marriage is a bit of a disaster. I
Yeah.
mean, they're just totally incompatible.
Yeah.
He's this like, wild old man. And she's this like, innocent young woman.
Yeah.
And she actually has a really tragic backstory.
Oh, yeah.
She was raised by this like tyrannical old woman.
Yeah, the widow of a general.
Yeah. And her life was so bad that she actually tried to kill herself at one point.
Oh.
So it's kind of understandable why she eloped with Fyodor Pavlovich.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like any escape was
Yeah.
better than what she was going through.
Yeah.
But it definitely wasn't a happy marriage.
No.
And they have two sons together, Ivan and Alyosha.
Rape.
And after Sofia Ivanovna dies, the boys are raised mostly by this guy named Yefim Petrovich,
Yeah.
who's like this kind and generous man
Yeah.
who also manages their inheritance
Yeah.
because they got some money from Sofia Ivanovna's family.
Right.
So let's talk about these two sons,
Okay.
Ivan and Alyosha.
Yeah.
They're very different.
Very damn.
Ivan is kind of gloomy and withdrawn,
Yeah.
even from a young age.
Yeah.
He's very aware of their situation,
Yeah.
living on someone else's charity.
Yeah.
having this, like, embarrassing father.
Right.
But he's also incredibly intelligent,
Yeah.
like brilliant.
Yeah.
He shows this amazing aptitude for learning from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And he ends up going to university in Moscow.
Yeah.
But he struggles financially
Yeah.
because there are delays with his inheritance.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is he never asks his father for help.
Yeah.
He's too proud.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just knows that it would be pointless.
Right.
And then you have Alyosha, who's the youngest.
Yeah.
And he lost his mother when he was only 4 years old.
Yeah.
But he has these really vivid memories of her.
Yeah.
He remembers her face. He remembers her affection.
Yeah.
And there's this one particular memory that really stands out,
Yeah.
where he's like 4 years old,
Yeah.
and his mother is kneeling in front of an icon,
Yeah.
and she's weeping uncontrollably.
Yeah.
And she's holding him up to the icon,
Wow.
like she's trying to get the Virgin Mary to protect him or something.
Yeah, like she's entrusting him to a higher power.
Yeah. And I think this memory really shapes Alyosha
Yeah.
because he becomes this very devout person.
Yeah.
He's not necessarily like, super outwardly religious,
Right.
but he has this deep faith in people.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly compassionate.
Yeah.
And he's very slow to judge.
Yeah.
He just accepts people as they are.
Yeah, he's got this kind of like quiet wisdom about him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you have these two brothers,
Yeah.
Ivan the intellectual, the cynic,
Right.
and Alyosha, the believer, the compassionate one.
Yeah.
And their relationship is really fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're both trying to figure out like what it means to be human.
Yeah.
What it means to live in a world where there's so much suffering.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about another really important character, the elder Zosima.
Okay.
He's this spiritual leader at a local monastery.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like a saintly figure.
Yeah, he's very revered.
Yeah, people come from all over to see him,
Yeah.
to get his blessing,
Yeah.
to ask for his advice.
Yeah.
And he's this really interesting figure because he represents this tradition of elders in Russian Orthodoxy.
Yeah, the start C.
Yeah. And these elders are like spiritual guides,
Yeah.
people who have renounced the world
Yeah.
and dedicated their lives to prayer and contemplation.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to have this special wisdom.
Yeah.
And they can offer guidance
Yeah.
to people who are struggling.
Yeah.
And so the elder Zosima is like the epitome of
Yeah.
this.
He's like a model elder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Alyosha is totally devoted to him.
Yeah.
He sees him as his mentor,
Yeah.
his spiritual father.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that not everyone in the monastery likes the elder Zosima.
Yeah.
There are some monks who are jealous of him,
Yeah.
or they think he's a fraud.
Right.
And there's this one monk in particular, Father Farapont,
Yeah.
who's this like really strict ascetic.
Yeah.
And he's totally opposed to the whole idea of elders.
Yeah. He thinks it's all nonsense.
Yeah, he thinks it's like a corruption of true Christianity.
Right.
And so there's this kind of tension
Yeah.
within the monastery
Yeah.
between these different approaches to faith.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this one scene where there's this gathering at the elder Zosima's cell.
Yeah.
And it's like all the major characters are there.
Right.
Fyodor Pavlovich is there. Ivan is there. Alyosha is there.
Yeah.
And all these monks.
Yeah.
And there's this guy Musov, who's
Yeah.
this kind of like pompous landowner.
Yeah.
And everyone's just kind of like on edge.
Yeah. The tension is palpable.
Yeah. And then the elder Zosima does this really strange thing. He bows down at Dmitri's feet.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, what the heck is going on?
Right.
And Alyosha's really disturbed by it.
Yeah. He feels like it's some kind of omen.
Yeah, he thinks something bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then later on, the elder Zosima tells Alyosha that he has to leave the monastery
Yeah.
and go out into the world.
Yeah.
And Alyosha is heartbroken
Yeah.
because he doesn't want to leave the elder Zosima,
Right.
but he obeys.
Yeah.
And he goes out into the world. And at the same time, Fyodor Pavlovich is out there causing all kinds of trouble.
Yeah.
He's being his usual outrageous self.
Right.
And he's demanding that Alyosha come back home.
Yeah.
And then Dmitri shows up.
Yeah.
And he's all passionate and intense.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how he loves Grushenka.
Yeah.
And he's also talking about how much he hates his father.
Right.
And it's just like this really chaotic scene.
Yeah.
So we've got all these characters.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of like tangled up in each other's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all struggling with these big questions
Yeah.
about faith and family and freedom and responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's just like this amazing tapestry that Dostoyevsky has woven together.
Yeah. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Dmitri's financial problems.
Okay.
This is a big part of the plot.
Yeah.
So Dmitri is convinced that his father owes him 3,000 rubles,
Right.
and he's constantly trying to get this money from him.
Yeah.
And it creates this huge conflict between them.
Yeah.
And then Dmitri gets involved with these two women, Katerina Ivanovna and Grushenka.
Right.
And they both complicate his life in different ways.
Yeah.
Katerina Ivanovna is kind of like this proud and haughty woman.
Yeah.
And she's engaged to Dmitri,
Right.
but she doesn't really love him.
Yeah.
She's more interested in his money.
Right.
And then Grushenka is this like wild and passionate woman.
Yeah.
And Dmitri's totally obsessed with her.
Yeah.
But she's playing games with him.
Yeah.
She's not sure if she wants to be with him or not.
Right.
And there's this other guy in the picture too.
Yeah.
This old merchant who's been her protector.
Right.
So it's just like this really messy love triangle.
Yeah. It's very complicated.
Yeah. And Dmitri's just like spiraling out of control.
Yeah.
He's drinking too much. He's gambling. He's getting into fights.
Right.
He's just like a total mess.
Yeah.
And Alyosha's really worried about him.
Yeah.
He's trying to help him,
Right.
but it's hard because Dmitri is just so self-destructive.
Yeah.
Okay, so meanwhile, back at the monastery, the elder Zosima is dying,
Yeah.
and he has this really profound spiritual transformation. He becomes even more loving and compassionate.
Yeah.
And he starts talking about how everyone is connected
Yeah.
and how we all need to love each other.
Right.
And he tells Alyosha this story about his own youth,
Yeah.
how he used to be a really wild and reckless guy.
Yeah.
And he got into this duel,
Yeah.
and he almost killed this other guy.
Yeah.
And then he had this like epiphany
Yeah.
where he realized that he was living a totally wrong life.
Right.
And he decided to change.
Yeah.
And he became a monk.
Right.
And he dedicated his life to serving God.
Yeah.
And so he's telling Alyosha this story.
Yeah.
And he's saying that everyone has the potential to change.
Yeah.
That even the worst sinner can be redeemed.
Right.
And then he dies.
Yeah.
And Alyosha's devastated because he's lost his spiritual father.
Right.
And he's really struggling with his faith.
Yeah.
Because he was expecting the elder Zosima's death to be this like miraculous event.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Right.
It's just like a normal death.
Yeah.
And Alyosha's like, why?
Yeah.
Why didn't God do something?
Right.
Why didn't he perform a miracle?
Yeah.
And he's really questioning everything he believes in.
Yeah. It's a real crisis of faith for him.
Yeah. Okay, so meanwhile, Dmitri is still spiraling out of control,
Yeah.
and he's desperate for money.
Right.
He needs to pay back Katerina Ivanovna,
Yeah.
and he also wants to run away with Grushenka.
Right.
And so he goes to his father's house,
Yeah.
and he thinks that his father has this envelope full of money hidden somewhere,
Right.
and he's trying to find it,
Yeah.
but he can't find it,
Right.
and he gets really frustrated,
Yeah.
and he ends up killing his father.
Yeah.
But it turns out that Dmitri didn't actually kill his father.
Yeah. It was Smerdyakov. Yeah.
The servant.
Yeah. But Dmitri is accused of the crime.
Right.
And he's put on trial.
Yeah.
And the evidence against him is pretty strong,
Yeah.
but he's innocent.
Right.
And so the question is, will he be able to prove his innocence?
Right.
And will the real killer be brought to justice?
Yeah. And that's where I think we should leave it for today,
Yeah.
because I don't want to spoil the ending for anyone who hasn't read the book.
Right.
But I will say this. The Brothers Karamazov is one of the most powerful and thought-provoking books I've ever read.
Oh, yeah.
It really makes you think about the big questions in life,
Yeah.
about good and evil,
Yeah.
about faith and doubt,
Yeah.
about love and hate,
Yeah.
about family and forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's just an amazing book.
It is.
So if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. You won't regret it.
And even if you have read it, I think it's worth revisiting
Yeah.
because there's always something new to discover.
Yeah. It's a book that stays with you.
Yeah, it really does. Okay, so that's it for today's deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.